Okay, so we are now recording for the beginning soap making basics. Can everybody see the screen? Everybody's good?
Yes.
Awesome. Okay. Soap making is really, really easy. It's something that um, I started learning how to do because, one, my daughter had an issue with most commercial soaps, and I figured this would be a good skill to learn, especially for after the fact. Um, to kind of get started, there's some terms that might, as you start looking for your own recipes, that will be confusing. So I've kind of got a list here. I've also got some um, files that I'll upload for people to be able to use to read. They're not necessary for the class right now, but it will give you further information. If you see in a recipe CP, that would be for cold process. It's just making it from scratch. It's not the melt and pour stuff because you can literally melt soap down and combine it and make more soap. That's not the same thing that we're doing here. It's kind of a misnomer in the sense that cold process, it's just not cooked. Hot process is usually done in a crock pot, which is the next term you might look at. Um, the lye water gets very hot, so it may seem like it's being cooked, but it's really not. So it's considered cold processed. Um, like I said, hot process is the same. It's just cooked usually in a crock pot. It usually takes longer. What the difference with hot process is that that cooking that you do in the crock pot actually it takes the place of your cure time. So you can literally use that soap right off the gate. The cure time you might have would be can vary. It just depends on how big your soap bars are, how strong your lye solution was to begin with. If it's a very strong lye solution, you may either want to add more water to kind of dilute that a bit, or you can let it cure a little bit longer. That way you can get it's not so caustic on the skin. 3 to 6 weeks, you'll get a harder bar with a better lather. It makes it much more. It'll actually extend the life of the soap. So it's good to give it a good time to firm up, to harden up. It will actually end up with a better product in the end. One of the things that I've found when I make soap is the dreaded orange spot. And what that is it's a sign of your soap being rancid in that one spot. It doesn't mean the whole soap bar is bad. It just means that that particular spot is, it's usually associated when you have like the liquid oils. That can cause that much of a problem. If it's super fatted just means you've added more oil than you would have lye to eat it up because it's a chemical reaction. You have one lye molecule for one fat molecule. They combine. Basically, there's nothing either element left, and what you have is soap. If you think of like the Dove soap you hear about being 1/4 moisturizing cream, that's actually more moisturizing. I haven't ordered anybody any pizza while I'm in a meeting. Sorry. I apologize. That was a interruption there. With the Dove soap that is higher in moisturizing content, what that means is it basically has more oil left. That's really the only thing that causes it to be more moisturizing is you have more oil or more fat left over after that soap has been made, after that saponification process is done. And I'll go into what saponification is here in a few minutes. Essential oils, I think all of us are pretty well familiar with essential oils. If there's anybody that isn't, let me know. Okay.
No, I apologize, Dana. I have no idea what an essential oil is.
You don't?
No, I have no. This is for me. This is the unknown. I know nothing about this stuff at all.
Okay, that's fine. That's why I asked. Essential oils, if you've ever been to, like, say, a Whole Foods market, or if you've ever looked at doing, like, doTERRA, the essential oils you have, like, you can use for, like, lavender or, that's a big common one, sandalwood, you'll have these, they're a concentrated oil. You can do peppermint, spearmint. I made some spearmint soap for my daughter with some essential oils. The essential oils add fragrance. You can add they're used for a lot of different things. So it's just an extract, concentrated oil extract of an herb or of something you want to. If that makes any sense, if you've ever seen a lot of people use the doTERRA. That's the one that I can think of the most. Is you use it for alternative medicine. I've seen people use it for that. You can use them in soap making too. It adds fragrances. It adds different things. But the thing with essential oils, you have to be very careful with some of them. They can actually speed up the process and make soap a lot faster, or turn it into soap a lot faster, and then it can seize up, and then it can be bad. So you have to be kind of careful when you add it. I wouldn't recommend using essential oils as a first-time soap maker, just for that reason, because you don't really know what it'll do and how it will react to the soap. But it's really good to add fragrance. I think one of my favorites is the sandalwood. It's expensive. Sandalwood is, I think, one of the most expensive essential oils I've found. Upwards of $50 for a small, few milliliter bottle of essential oil. It's rather pricey, which is why most sandalwoods are expensive.
Dan, I have another question. So, if we were out and we had zero access to, a store, would I be able to go out and collect mint leaves or some other type of flower and be able to get this extract from the flower using very primitive means? Is that possible?
It probably is possible. It's not something I've explored a lot of yet. I know that mint you could probably do that with. Lavender you could probably do that with. It's a long process, and it can be, from what little I've seen of it, it is complicated, but it is possible. I just haven't explored as much of it.
Gotcha. Okay.
Which with your fat sources, like say your oils, not the essential oils, but the oils like coconut oil, palm oil, all of that is again something I have to order or I buy from a store, because most of those sources are not local. They're not even native to this country. It's going to be harder to get those types of oils later on because they're just not going to be available. Most of the time, and I'll go into the differences between the different oils here in a minute, but it can affect the soap. I mean, it's still going to be soap. It may not be the soap you're familiar with. Is the only difference. The rancidity that you have to watch out for, and there is a additive you can put in there to help prevent that, but it can occur over time if you add too much fat or too much oil to a soap. You can run the risk of it going rancid, and again, it just kind of depends on how much extra oil is left over, or any kind of organic items. Like I think we used aloe vera at one point, and it doesn't really saponify very well, so it's something that's left over because it's not an oil. That can be harder to get saponified. It can affect whether or not it goes bad after a certain amount of time. So you do have a shelf life with these. Now, usually in the stores, you usually have additives added to these soaps to actually make them more shelf stable, so they'll last longer. We're not going to be adding those kinds of ingredients. We won't be adding those kinds, like how you'll add ingredients to food to make it last longer. Now, kind of the same concept with soap, and we won't have that, so it won't necessarily last as long. We talked about rebatching. That's just the process of melting down existing soap. The saponification is the chemical process, and that's what happens when you have a lye molecule and your fat molecule. They combine to make the soap. And in a recipe where you have no superfatting, there will be no lye left over and no oil left over. So that means it's all of it's combined, all of it's made into soap. And technically, within 24 to 48 hours, that soap should be able to be used. It's better to give it the cure time. That way it does give you the harder bar, and it gives it a lot more use out of it. The superfatting is just the amount of oils left over. And the percentage of that, if you keep it low enough, you don't have to run the risk of the soap becoming rancid. 5% is generally about where you want to be as far as extra oils that your lye won't use. Um, that should give you a bar that's moisturizing enough but won't go bad so quickly, and it will actually lather up pretty well and be the kind of what the product what you're looking for. Any
Hey,
questions?
Dana.
Yeah.
Yeah. Quick question, Dana. So it looks like there's two primary elements. You've got animal fat
Mm-hmm.
and lye. Is
Yep.
that it?
Yep.
And then you want to try to get a 50-50 mix of that as best you can.
Approximately. I mean, you're going to find that the recipes you make, if you there's different lye calculators online. If you're going to make your own recipe, it's best to run it through that because you're going to see exactly how much you would need. Um, Again, if you use like an animal fat, say for example tallow or lard, um, and you make your own lye, which I'll go into here in a minute, it's going to produce a much softer kind of soap, more of a liquid soap. Um, but yeah, it's really pretty simple. It's not a major. It doesn't
Okay, so
calculations.
so so lye, and honestly, I don't even know what lye is. What
Uh,
is lye?
I'm gonna get to that. I promise.
Oh, okay.
You're.
Let her talk.
But lye is a chemical, and it's a drain opener, and it's something that you can when you let me see if I can where I'm at here. Yeah, it's coming up next or here in a few minutes. So, um, but the lye is just a chemical. It is either sodium hydroxide or it's potassium hydroxide. And the sodium hydroxide, if you think about drain opener, that's kind of what it is. If you've ever gone to the store to see the Red Devil lye, and I've got a picture of what the bottle is that I use, um, comes with, and it shows you exactly kind of what to look for. It has to be 100% lye. If you get anything other than 100% sodium hydroxide, the other extra chemicals that are in there can adversely react to the soap and can have a major problem with your soap. It can actually create other issues with your soap that could actually burn you. You have no way of knowing what that's going to do. So it's very crucial to make sure that when you buy drain opener, if you go and buy this stuff in the stores, you have to have 100% lye. Otherwise, you're running a pretty huge risk of reactions that you weren't prepared for. So once we get down to there, again, when I start talking about trace, that's basically if you've ever made pancake batter, cake mix, it's when you take your spoon and you run it across the top, it leaves a little bit of a trail, and I've got a picture of that as well so you can kind of see what I'm talking about. But as I go through the class, when I start mentioning these terms, you'll have an idea what I'm talking about, a little idea. It's kind of hard to see without having it made, but you'll at least be familiar enough with the term to not be hopefully totally confused. A thick trace sometimes is used if you're using a different color. Again, those are more complicated things that I haven't even really had the time to try yet, but is on my list to do. If you want to use different colors, different layers, a thicker trace will help with that on the bottom to give it a more stable base to use. So trace comes in very handy. It helps you know when the soap is ready. It'll tell you when it's ready to pour into the molds. So when you see a recipe, it will say when the soap reaches trace, that's when it's ready to pour into the molds. That's when you get it out of the pot and into whatever you're going to use. And depending upon your desired result, it'll depend on what kind of level of trace the recipe calls for. It depends on how much you want to actually continue to cook or to let the soap mix and cure. Seizing. Seizing is when we talked about how if the soap gets to be made soap too fast, the soap will seize up. At that point, you really can't salvage it. The reason being is you don't know how much of that soap was actually saponified. In other words, we don't know how much of the lye was used and how much of the soap or the oil is left over. Since you really don't know that, that batch is pretty much ruined. So if you ever have your soap seize up, it's like really thick. I mean, think about it like really thick, heavy cookie dough, and you can't really spoon through it, that's kind of where you'd be at when you have a soap batch that's seized. I haven't had that happen yet, thankfully, but when you use things like movers, we were talking about the different essential oils, things that can actually increase the heat, and when you increase the heat, you make it go faster. When you make it go faster, that's what causes it to seize. Gel phase is something that you'll see. It isn't required, but it's generally something you might see. It's as soap continues to saponify, goes through the process. It's normal. It doesn't have to happen, but it sometimes can be a little disconcerting when you see it and you're not used to it, looking for it, and you're not sure what it's doing. I've got a picture of that too that kind of shows you. It's kind of just like Vaseline in the middle of it. It makes it, it's discolored. It looks a little bit darker. So it's kind of, you're not sure what it is. It's normal, and it won't hurt the soap at all. If you see the different little orange spots right here in the center, and all along the edges of these soaps, that is what the dreaded orange spot would be. And that's an example of a part of that soap that has gone rancid. So if you do make soap and you see something like that, all you need to do is just pare that off, and it's fine. It just means that that particular spot has has gone rancid. It doesn't hurt it necessarily, but it's probably better to not use it because it's not exactly as pleasant. That's an example of like a thin trace. So you can kind of see when I mix my soap, and I use a stick blender, and I'll show you what I'm talking about with that here in a second. What that does is it gives you an idea of when your soap would be ready to be poured into the molds. So that, hopefully, any questions on what soap is when it reaches trace, whether it's ready, what kind of trace might be, are there any other questions so far?
Is there a general rule of thumb of how long you would cook, or does it start bubbling, or is there any other type of telltale sign that's hey, it's ready?
No, because you're not really cooking the soap. You're going to heat your oils up to a certain temperature, and I've got that also here in a little bit. But you're not really cooking it per se. It's not going to get it's not like on an oven where you're going to be hot, because you're going to take your oils off the heat source when you put your lye water into your oils.
Okay.
So you won't have it bubble. This is really the only way you're going to know is whether or not it reaches trace, because that's what, when you read all of your recipes, every recipe you see is going to say once soap reaches trace, it'll reach a thin trace, or it'll have a thick trace, or whatever. You'll see that term most often used as a way to know whether your soap is ready for the molds or not.
Okay.
So, okay, what lye? Lye is very caustic and it can burn. It's a chemical. It is, like I said, the lye that you get in the stores is the sodium hydroxide. Potassium hydroxide is what you would normally get when you make lye from wood ash, and that is something that I have not yet done because I don't have access to the wood to be able to do that with. But both of them are very caustic and can burn, chemical as well as heat, because the lye water, before I cool my lye water down, it's 200 degrees or more. And so it can be it can cause a lot of problems if you're not prepared to deal with it. Always mix your lye in a very well ventilated place. I usually do mine outside. I'm making it when it's nice weather on my porch. It's a lot easier. I don't have to worry about keeping the house open, keeping the pets out of it, keeping the kids out of it. It's pretty easy to not have those fumes build up in the house and make people sick or actually hurt people. So it's better to do it in a very, very well ventilated place, or even outdoors. Never, ever, ever add the water to the lye. So if you pour the water onto the lye, you can have a very extreme exothermic reaction. It'll, like a volcanic reaction. It'll be very volatile, and you don't want that. If you add the lye to the water separately, because it usually comes in like little granules or beads or flakes. If you add that to the water and let it stir, let it absorb, let it all incorporate in, it's not going to do that. So you always remember, always add the lye to the water. It's just for safety purposes. Safety gear, gloves, and eye protection. You cover your exposed skin that is likely to come into the contact with any of the lye solution, which is the water that has the lye added to it, or the raw soap. Raw soap is just going to be soap that has not yet completed the saponification process. So, metal containers, bad options. I think it's specifically aluminum that can cause a very, very adverse reaction. I use a glazed, like a ceramic dish, to mix my lye water in, and that usually works real well. It's not going to come into glass bowls would be good. That would be another alternative. So it's just something that, as long as it's not metal. You can use a metal like a cake pan as a soap mold, but you do have to line it to make sure it doesn't come into contact with that raw soap.
Plastic is right, Dana?
Do what now?
Plastic is good.
I would, yeah. You can silicone, yes. A silicone mold, absolutely. That's like a plastic, right? So you could use that. I wouldn't use like a Tupperware dish because it can be caustic, and it may. I've never tried that. It's not been recommended. Most of the molds that I've seen people use are either wood or silicone, or they use like a cake pan, but they line it with like a wax paper or parchment paper. The wax paper, you'd better make sure this the wax side down. But yes, that plastic, probably not a good plan. It make it too hot, so it could warp your container, and that could affect your soap. So hopefully this particular brand of lye is what I usually keep on hand. It has 100% lye. It's an airtight container. One thing about lye that is good to understand, that it will easily absorb any moisture out of the air that is around it. So if you have very high moisture in the air and you don't have it in an airtight container, it will absorb all of that moisture out of the air, and you could have a very big mess on your hands. So when you have lye, and this would hold true if you make your lye and want to store it, because you could do that, or you have the lye you've bought and you want to store it for later use, airtight containers. Make sure there's like a plastic gasket like seal on the lid, so that way it does not let any air into it. You don't want to open up your bottle or your container that has the lye in it and then have a serious problem with burns, because that could be an issue if it gets water in there. Treatment for lye burns, something that you need to keep in mind. I actually have personal experience with this. I forgot to pull my hair back. I had longer hair at the time, and I brushed my hair out of my eyes, out of my face with my gloves, and I had not rinsed my gloves thoroughly. I had a very long burn on my neck from exposure to the lye water. I had to learn how to correct that. The rule of thumb is flush it with water. I realize water does activate the lye, but it also dilutes it. So you're going to flush the area out with water. Vinegar does produce an exothermic reaction. It can make the heat more intense, so it's not your go-to thing to use, but it can neutralize the lye it can use to clean it up. Once you've fully flushed and rinsed the area off, it can neutralize it in smaller amounts, but it's not your go-to thing. Baking soda mixed with water to form a paste will actually neutralize the lye and prevent the burn. Because I did that, I used the baking soda with water into a paste on my neck. It never burned. I never had any issues with it. And in fact, because when it first started, it can hurt pretty bad. So it's definitely something to keep in mind. Eyes, I would definitely get medical attention for that, because it is such a sensitive area. and because the lye is so caustic and it can cause damage to your eyes, I would probably be more inclined to get medical treatment if it got into your eyes than anyplace else, unless you have a very serious burn somewhere else. But with eyes, it would definitely, especially contact lenses, can keep that pressed up against your eye, and it's not a good plan. Not a good plan for it to be there. And this is where, Will, you were talking about the types of lye. Sodium hydroxide, commonly called drain opener, you can see the chemical name for it is the NaOH. So that's going to be, if you look for that particular sign or those particular information, you'll see that it is sodium hydroxide. It has to be 100%. It is the sodium part that makes the more solid, firm bar of soap. Potassium hydroxide, which is commonly called caustic potash, can be made from wood ash, but it produces a softer form of soap. You can add sodium to a soap made with potassium hydroxide, but it's not going to be the same. It will still not be a real firm bar of soap. So if you want to make that firm bar like you're used to getting in the stores, the sodium hydroxide is the lye to use.
That's the type of soap that you make when you're out in the bush.
Exactly right. The potassium hydroxide, a test to see if your potassium hydroxide is too strong or not strong enough is what our pioneers used to use was a chicken feather. And if the chicken feather dissolved, then it was going to be strong enough to make soap. Depending upon how fast that chicken feather dissolved was whether or not it was too strong. If it doesn't dissolve at all, obviously you need to add more lye or dip the ashes a little bit further. And I'll go through that here in just a minute. How to make it. You can make sodium hydroxide. I've not done this. It is complicated, at least from my perspective. Somebody who has more knowledge than I do might not see it as quite so difficult. But it's not something I'm comfortable trying. You just need a container, carbon electrodes, alligator clips, water, salt, and a power source. And you can make sodium hydroxide. If you try it, by all means do some research first, because it may be more hassle than it's worth, because salt in any kind of post event is going to be very, very precious and a commodity that is probably not best used to make soap. At least that's my own opinion. It's up to you guys what you want to use your resources with and for, but it is possible to be made. So just want to let you know. For potassium hydroxide, the wood ash, it must be a hardwood. The reason being is the softer woods have too much resin in them so it interferes. So it has to be a hardwood like cherry, beech, walnut, oak. Any hardwood can be used. Basically, you just burn your wood like you normally would for a campfire. Take your ashes. You're going to put those ashes in a barrel and pour water over them, it's similar to if you've ever filtered water. You would need to put something down, like drill holes in the bottom of like a 5-gallon bucket, place some rocks or so or something like that to kind of let the flow go through so it doesn't get packed up in there, and just repeat. And what you do as you collect that water, then pour it back over the ashes, collect it, and that's what that will do is that will concentrate the lye solution, because you'll need to have it to a certain concentration in order for it to make the soap. You can put them in a sack or a pillowcase, which is what a lot of people do. I've seen one video where they took like a sack, they tied some rope around it, and then they actually tied it to a pulley system where they were able to work it to where it was automated, and it worked out pretty well. They were actually able to make lye fairly quickly. It takes about a couple of hours to get a good solution, especially if you have a full pillowcase full of ashes. It can take a little bit. Concentrating the solution, boiling it will, if you've ever thought about a sauce that you cook and you reduce the sauce down so it thickens up, it's the same concept. You're going to boil it down, it's going to concentrate up, and it's going to bring it to where the the pH to where it can actually make the soap. Again, the old test was to dissolve a chicken feather. And once it's able to do that, if you have the ability to test with a pH meter, by all means. But again, afterwards, we're probably not going to have those options. So knowing how to test it to see if it's strong enough or not is going to be key. So if that chicken feather doesn't dissolve, then you know you need to concentrate the solution a bit more. If it dissolves too fast, you can just add a little bit more water to weaken it and make it to where it's in the right proportions. The pH level for making soap is about 1.0 to 14.0. 14 is the pH level for making soap. So if you have a meter and have a way to test it, that might be something to try while we still have that technology available. That way, once you have made soap, once you know what it can do, when you don't have those conveniences available, it won't be such a surprise.
I might add here for you,
Sure.
while you have the meter, to go to the craft store and get some chicken feathers.
Uh-huh.
And at the different pH levels, use those feathers and see what they're doing, so that you'll have it in your mind how fast the chicken feather reacts at the different pH levels, and make a note of it.
Absolutely, that would be a good idea. Because, and again, I haven't tried that yet, but yeah, that would make sense, because that would give you more than just a guesswork of what the pH might be based on how fast that chicken feather does dissolve. That would definitely work. As far as making the soap, it's pretty simple. The only thing you really have to do, I have a digital scale right now. Soap is generally pretty specific. It does require a certain parameter to be able to, you have to get pretty exact. So if you have, your recipe calls for so much percentage of whatever oils, it translates to so many grams. So whatever your scale says, make sure it can read it fairly accurately. Digital's what we have now. You might take a look at what are options as far as scales are concerned, and whether you can get accurately in that same amounts. That way you're not coming up with anything too either over super fatted or not enough oil in there to actually, so the soap is too caustic. I usually prepare my soap mold beforehand. If I'm going to be using, say, a pan and I need to line it, I'll usually have my soap pan, my mold already set up, already laid out. I'll usually have the parchment paper already in it, so everything's good to go. I'll have my bowls, I have my oils separated out. I tend to measure out everything I have melted. It's just how I found that works for me. It's not necessary. Some of the oils are going to be at when they're actually solid at room temperature, that's really the only ones you have to, that I actually measure out and melt out. So it makes it easier, at least for me. You'll find, as you continue to make soap, you'll find ways that work for you. All of these different ingredients, all these different materials you might use. The thermometer, again, I have a digital thermometer. It's easier to use a digital thermometer and see exactly what the temperature is. But again, that's one thing that you'll probably need to keep in mind later on to find an analog version for that. That way you can still continue to know what the temperatures are and be able to keep those oils and those lye water approximately the same temperature. A stick immersion blender. Yes.
Can you use a candy thermometer?
You probably could. I've not used one. I think most people usually use like a candy thermometer or meat thermometer, as long as it's something that will be able to check. And is it metallic? If you have like a metallic on the end of it, it probably would be something you want to keep out of there. But it shouldn't be any different if you use that.
I just wondered, because the ones I've seen are all glass. outside.
Yeah, and I think as long as the ones I've seen, I don't see any reason why it would be a problem. Glass, I'm making the lye in a ceramic or a glass type container, so I wouldn't see where the thermometer would be any different, especially if it's going to be used for hot liquids like that. And the thing is, candy usually gets hotter than this anyway, so I would think that'd probably be an okay thing to do. Because I think when we make fudge, the sugar gets pretty warm, pretty hot, and we're only going to be about 120 degrees. And I think the candy even gets hotter than that, so I think you'd be all right. Again, when you're talking about using sources to make your soap, the stick immersion blender is what we use now. I haven't seen any non-electric or that doesn't require some kind of electricity to use. I haven't been able to find any options for that to make soap with. Again, making it with the potassium hydroxide, it may very well be a different thing, but for now that's what we use, and it's what gets us to the trace a little bit faster. It can happen pretty quick too if you're not careful, so pay attention to see. What I usually do is, as I'm mixing my lye or the soap, I will bring it up on occasion to see, and I'll kind of, as I mix it around, sometimes it takes a little bit of time and experience to do this. Once you see how soap is made and get some experience mixing it up, it will be a lot more clear how that soap reaches trace and how that looks in your pan as you're mixing it together. You'll know more about how long it takes you to make the soap, how long it takes to reach trace. So it can vary. So just as long as you kind of understand to kind of watch that, especially if you're using any kind of a essential oil or anything that can heat it up extra, it's a good idea to kind of watch, because it can happen very quickly. Sometimes if you're familiar with making things like if you're familiar with making candy, sometimes when you're making it, you look down and it's not candy yet, but then in a tenth of a second, it's there, it's done. And soap can be the same way. So it's something definitely to make sure you keep an eye on as you're mixing. That way you don't overmix it, it doesn't seize up on you, makes it a lot better. In answer to the different molds about using plastics, the silicone molds are the ones I would like to get to, but for now I've been using the cake pan. That's why I have a picture for that one. Again, as long as you line it with parchment paper or wax paper with the wax side down, it shouldn't be a problem. You can make soap in any shape. You can make it with any kind of design. You can do you're really only limited by your imagination. If you're looking for more functional, the wooden molds will bring you with like the square bars of soap. The silicone on the top right will give you another square bar of soap. One thing that you can do is if your soap doesn't come out of the molds easily, put it in the freezer. You get it cold, and it should release from those molds without any problems. We had our soap, our first batch we ever made was in small little plastic containers, and it stuck. We couldn't get it out. Froze it for a little bit, it pulled right out with no problems at all. So that works out pretty well. Just when you're getting started, read through your recipe. It may look intimidating at first, and some of them are, but if you read through it, like any kind of cooking recipe, any food, any new recipe you try, you want to kind of see what it does, what it requires. Sometimes the author for that recipe will have notes. Sometimes a person who's made that soap may come back and say, hey, look, I tried this didn't work. This worked better. Sometimes you'll find those notes in the recipe, so it's best to kind of take a look at that. This comes from personal experience. Do not substitute something unless you know what it's going to do. We made a batch of soap, and my neighbor, bless her heart, she and I have been working with making soap for a couple of years now. She wanted to try something different and try something new. And we didn't run it through the lye calculator to see if it would work. And we came up with a It was bad, put it that way. That's all I can tell you. It just, if you're going to substitute something, check to see whether what you want to do will work. If you have to run it through a lye calculator, there's, like I said, different ones online. You can actually go through and see if what you're wanting to do will work. I know that substitutions can come up, especially when you have things like palm oil, which is a more objectionable oil to use because of the way it's produced. Sometimes people want to change and use, and so if you look to see what can be changed, you won't end up with what we had, and it smelled horrible, it was a mess, it didn't really firm up very well, and it was not good soap. So always read your recipe and double check to make sure any changes you make will in fact give you the result you want. I always start my lye water first. Reason being, the lye gets to 100 or to 200 degrees. If you want to have it cool down in enough time, it's best to start it first. So I will put my lye, the actual lye, into the water, and I will set it aside. And I will let that cool down a bit, and then while it cools down, I mix my oils together. I have all that ready to go. I will get everything up to the point where I would actually add the lye. So by the time I'm ready to use it, it's usually cooled off enough that it's ready to use. For cold processed soap, the preferred temperature for your lye and the oils are 120 to 130 degrees. That's generally the area you want to have. Any colder and it's not going to make soap. Too hot and you could scorch some of your oils and it could be a bad thing. So you want to make sure you keep it to a certain degree, 120 to 130 degrees. There is some people say you don't have to have the oils within 10 degrees of each other. Other people do. I've only done that way for the simple fact that most of the reputable soap makers that I found online suggest this. Therefore, that's what we did. I don't know how the product will turn out if you try to deviate from this. So keeping it within 10 degrees of each other is probably your best bet. It's not necessarily going to hurt it per se, but I know that if it gets colder, it's not going to work as well because it requires it to be hotter.
Dana, quick
Yes.
question.
Sure.
Maybe I missed this, but okay, so the first thing that you do when you start to kind of mix things and get things moving is you add your lye to your water.
That's correct.
Do you heat the water up before you add the lye? Is that how you get the heat?
Nope. The reaction, that's what the reaction for the lye will actually heat the water up. As you mix it, you're going to see steam and heat coming off of it.
Okay.
It gets hot. Like I said, 200 degrees. It gets hot. That's why I have to have it cool off a little bit. And that's why you have to be careful with it, because not only will it give you a heat burn, but a chemical burn, because it's a chemical first of all, but two, it's going to be very hot. So if it comes in contact with your skin, you're definitely you're gonna know it very quickly.
All right, I'm good now. And then so when you said so now you've added your lye to your water. That thing's heating up. You're waiting for it to cool
Correct.
back down between 120 and 130. Now you said you're going to add your oils. Now you said oils plural, so are you using different types of oil?
Yep, I sure am. It depends on the recipe. You can use just olive oil if you wanted to, or just whatever oil. I mean, if you use, say for example, just lard or tallow or you can use a single oil. I use multiple ones, and usually most recipes I have found do. Coconut oil makes a really good soap. It's something that can be very drying if you use it in too high of an amount. But
what's the purpose of using multiple oils?
Well, some of your oils may be like, say for example, your liquid oils may produce a bar of soap that's too soft. So you're going to add a hard oil, like say something that's going to be more solid at room temperature. Palm oil, shea butter, mango butter, anything that's solid at room temperature will help add a firmness to your soap. So Or you could have some that you may want one that lathers better. You may want one that's more moisturizing. Different recipes have different things, and it really depends. There are literally millions of recipes out there. It it's it depends on what your goal is, what you want. It depends on your resources. Do you have the oils that you want? Um, I just use the normal oils that I get at my grocery store: olive oil, castor oil, grapeseed oil I can get, olive oil, avocado oil. Shea butter I have to order online, but
Well, let me ask you this: if I'm out in the woods and I want to make some, I want to make some soap, I mean, is it possible to kill an animal and then get the oil or from their fat?
yep, you
Can you
would
do
just have
that?
to render it down. And if you take the fat from an animal, render it down, what that basically does is it purifies it because you're going to get all the little cracklings, all the stuff out of the fat that might be in it, and you're going to render it down to just the oil. Yeah, you will. You could do that. Absolutely, you could do that. It is very possible. And what you'll end up with, again, though, is a very liquid soap. You will not have the hard bar. So it'll be more like, if you ever had that, like the hand soap that you get, that you at restaurants, pumps into your hand. It's that liquid stuff. That's what you're going to
Right.
come up with.
I got you. So to get a nice hard bar with good lather, what would I use?
You would use first of all, you would need to use sodium hydroxide versus the potassium hydroxide. And again, sodium hydroxide is the drain opener
Right.
versus potassium hydroxide, which is what you use when you wood ash. That's the caustic potash.
Right.
So really, to get a firm hard bar of soap, you have to use sodium hydroxide.
Gotcha.
You're
Okay.
not going to get one without it. You can get close if you added soda or added salt to your soap that you make with the potassium hydroxide, but it's not going to be the same thing.
Gotcha. Okay.
So, and again, like I said, it's going to be a resource that's going to be limited. So most people really don't want to use what little soap they may have or little salt they may have for something like that. I mean, you use it to cure meats, and that's one thing, but to use it for something like this, to just get a harder bar of soap when both will work, most people are pretty unwilling to part with their salt just to make a hard bar of soap. At least that's from what I've been, as I talk to people, that's usually their opinion. So, um, kind of went over the hard plastic mold, to freeze anything like that. Once the lye is cooled and your oils are heated to the right temperature, I add that water, that lye water, directly to the oils. So I have my oils heated up. They're in the pot. I take them off the heat, and I now put the lye water into the oil. And that's where I take the stick blender, and I immediately begin blending it with that stick blender. It may take some time for it to reach trace, so you blend. You may stop occasionally by lifting it up and letting the liquid soap drip over in like the batter to see if it's reached trace. It can do that fairly quickly, or it can take a little bit. So keeping an eye on it is a good plan. Once the soap has reached your trace, quickly pour that soap into the molds. It doesn't take much to do, so once they're in there, all you have to do is cover them up with a towel and it's over 24 hours. Saponification will take place within 24 to 48 hours. That's how long it will be before the soap can technically be used. So curing it will just give you a harder bar of soap that will last longer. After 24 hours, so you can slice it into different bars. You can take it out of the mold and just gonna let it sit and let it cure. But give it that 24 hours, and you're going to see the gel phase part of that fairly quickly after you get it into the mold and have it covered up, because it's going to heat up. That's why you cover it with a towel. It's going to heat up in that mold, and it's going to cure. And it's that saponification process that creates that gel phase that, as it's kind of doing its thing. It's kind of like when you're baking bread or you're making any kind of other recipe. It just kind of comes together and it bakes just right, and it makes the soap. I can't explain it any other way, but it doesn't take much, and it's actually fairly easy. There's a few really good sites that if you want to go to get more information, Brambleberry is where I get a lot of my supplies from. and they actually have a live calculator, and they had live chat help for us. We were trying to get a recipe to work. We had to make some adjustments because we didn't have one of the oils we needed, and we were trying to substitute it, but we had to figure out exactly how much. And they were very helpful. She even ran it through her own calculator and actually gave us a recipe. So there is a lot of help out there for those who want to use it. It was free to use, which is always a good thing. And they have very good. Their material, their ingredients are awesome. I used that to make my daughter's soap. We made soap for her wedding favors, and they were in her wedding colors. Really cool. So they have some really good supplies. They have molds. They have just a varied amount of things you can get. The Soap Queen, she's got a lot of recipes too to use, and she's got a lot of tips and tricks and things that she's learned over the years of her making soap. So again, there's a lot of resources out there.
Hey Dana, how do you add color? Is it just like food coloring? Is that how you change the color?
No, not food coloring, but you can get, it depends on what you want. There are different kinds of dyes. There's a mica that you would get, and you can I put that in my oil, and when I use like a green for my daughter's wedding because her colors were green, purple, and yellow. And the green came out really, really, really pretty green. It kind of swirled in the pot. You add that colorant to your oils before you actually blend them in with a stick blender. And depending upon the color you want, it depends on the mica that you'll use. Some work better for a cold process, some work better for others. So if you're wanting color, take a look at the kind of soap you're making, and then research the color that you want to use. Because again, that kind of goes into a little bit more of an advanced kind of thing, because there is a little more to it than just dumping the color in. You do kind of have to make sure that the color you're using is appropriate for the process you're using. Sometimes some work well with others don't. Some colors don't look. You may want like a bright, vivid color, and what you're going to get is kind of a muted, dull gray color that doesn't look very good. That's because the particular color you're using wasn't appropriate for that particular process, or wasn't made for that process. So you just kind of have to watch. It's fun to do, and it's fun to explore. There's all kinds. If you've seen the different swirls they do on the different soaps, you can make some really cool patterns. But it is a little bit more of an advanced thing to do, and I'd be more than happy to go into what we did with it and show some examples. I think I still have some of that soap left. I think I do. I think I have some more of that soap left. But it's really pretty green. It came out really nice. We had some purple we did. It looked gorgeous. But it's not going to be a true purple, or a true green, at least not with that. And if you do like a gel soap, if you've seen those clear see-through type soaps, there are some soaps you can make that do that, and it's those dyes, those micas that really dilute with a cold process soap will look better with those, and you'll get that true color, and you'll get that really pretty result you're looking for. Functional, when you're using if you're out in the woods and you kill a deer and you're curing your own oils and you're making your own soap, you may not have that option, but now it's fun to play. You can make something different. You can make really pretty functional soaps that are just they have a lot of neat features to them. That's kind of an example of the stick blender in action. It just kind of gives you an idea what you're doing with it. That one hasn't reached trace, it doesn't look like yet. It looks like it's still too liquidy to actually be traced, but that's what you might see. That's an example of gel phase. This particular person has a wooden mold that looks like they've lined it with parchment paper probably, and their soap is in the middle of curing. So it's going to turn into that. I had mine when we did the green for my daughter's soap. It looked really funky and looked really strange, and that's kind of what it looked like, but it's normal and not necessary, but it kind of makes you wonder if you've done it right. But if you see that, you've actually did exactly what you're supposed to do. Hot processed soap is going to be very different. If you cook it in a crock pot, it's going to come. You're not going to be able to pour it like you would with liquid soap, like with the cold processed soap. In a crock pot, it's going to look really clumpy. If you've ever seen the really rustic looking soaps in the stores of people that have made them, or if you've gone to a farmer's market, that's likely how they've made it. Is they've made it the crock pot. It'll be hot processed soap, and you're going to have to kind of. You think about serving up mashed potatoes at the dinner table. That's kind of what you're going to have to do. You're going to have to kind of glop it into your mold, and it's not necessarily going to be easy to pour, but it does come off with a really nice texture. You have oatmeal you can add to those. You can add all kinds of different things, and it's really, really nice to be able to do. And that's pretty much it. There's not a whole lot to it.
Dana?
Yes.
When my grandmother made soap, she would make it by the large wash tub.
Yes. Yes.
And they'd always pour it into a wood mold. Didn't have sections to it or anything. They cut it in bars.
Yeah.
And she'd make an awful lot of soap.
It does. You can. You can make them an awful lot if you can make them in big, huge batches. I mean, that's.
Yeah. And I remember for weeks she would have that soap out in the backyard, and she'd make like 40, 50 bars of soap. And she had an equal amount that she would just leave in the big size.
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
And my grandfather, he would take the large ones out to the garage.
Yeah, them boots are
had
too heavy for them feet.
Had a hand crank meat grinder,
They're
and he would cut that soap up and just grind it into flakes.
Okay.
And that's what they wash their clothes in.
Yeah. Exactly. That'd be cool. I think
so. You know, you can make your own clothes soap with it too.
Yep. So I think this it's like a Castile soap that people use to make laundry soap now.
Yeah.
I think usually you'll shred that up and then you'll use. I don't have my recipe in front of me, so I do apologize for that part. But yeah, you can. I've seen people make their own like a Castile. I think that's basically just. Oh, I want to say that's either olive oil.
I'm not sure. I really don't know. I couldn't say.
I'd have to pull up my recipes to check.
They use that soap for everything.
Oh yeah, and if I know that most people are, unless you've been living under a rock, you're pretty familiar with the Twilight books.
Yeah.
The same author wrote another one called The Host, and the book and the movie kind of dealt with this a little bit. They talked about they made their own soap, and they would have had to have been making the soap like this. They would have had to have done wood ash, and they talked about how the soap was always very harsh on their skin. It irritated their skin quite a bit, and so what that means is they probably didn't let it cure properly, because if you make soap from like say animal fat, like tallow or lard, and then and then use the potassium hydroxide instead, it's going to be a liquid soap. And they were probably using that right away, which is what probably caused them to have that issue on their skin. So that's pretty cool. I mean, be able to making your own like that would be.
Well, they were so frugal, and well, not frugal, but they were so. They were pioneer stock, and they used everything down to pencil stubs. And I was really blessed to have been raised in their presence and learn all this stuff.
That is awesome. I mean, that's one thing that I wish I had been able to do. My grandmother wasn't. She was born. Actually, she actually was born during the Great Depression. She actually remembered that before she passed away. And I kind of wish I'd actually had more time to talk with her. We used to spend summers with her, and she had so much knowledge. that is lost that I wish I had been able to get. And that would have been great. I can't imagine. That would have been an amazing experience to have.
I'm currently writing an article on that, on how different things that I learned growing up that kids nowadays are missing out.
They are. They really are. And this is something that I think that it's a fun thing now, but it's a functional thing. And I think it's something that, like anything else, is hard work. But
That's not Friday night. That's Saturday morning.
Oh, if they've got to lift a finger for anything, they don't want to learn it.
yeah, I know. My son's kind of sometimes the same way.
What?
Although he would like to learn a lot of different things. I'm going to go ahead and stop the recording on this here now real quick so we can